The attic was breathing again. You could hear it when the wind hit just right, timber groaning. Insulation sighing. Ghosts of air, moving through vents that hadn't worked in decades. I stood there at the top of the stairs, one hand gripping the rail, feeling like if I went one step higher, I'd cross some invisible border between the living and the dead. Harold's scent lingered up here. Cedarwood. Machine oil. The faint musk of an old man who still used aftershave from the 1,970 seconds. 3 months had passed since the funeral. But grief didn't obey calendars. It sat in the corners like dust, patient and silent. I told myself I came up here to clean. That's what widows do when they're trying not to fall apart. But really, I came for noise, some distraction louder than the quiet that had replaced him. Boxes were stacked in crooked towers, Christmas lights, our wedding china, Nathan's old toys, my son's toys. I brushed off a red fire truck and saw the dent near the front wheel. The same one Harold swore he'd fix next weekend. The next weekend never came. When I moved the box aside, I saw something wedged beneath a tarp, an old wooden chest. Dark mahogany. Brass hinges dulled by time. Taped to the top was a note in Harold's handwriting. Eve, do not open unless you have to. The words looked decades old. The ink faded into the grain of the wood. My pulse ticked faster. He'd always been secretive in small ways, a man of drawers that locked, folders labeled work stuff. But this felt different. I found a flathead screwdriver, popped the latch, and the chest creaked open with a long, tired breath. Inside, a stack of letters, a Bible with bent pages, a cigar tin filled with old coins, and an envelope with my name on it. Evelyn, written in the same stiff, deliberate script Harold used on Christmas cards. My throat went dry. I sat down on the attic floor, cross-legged like a child, dust rising in little silver clouds around me. The letter inside was dated 10 years ago, written after his first stroke, the one he recovered from. If you're reading this, Eve, I'm gone, and it's time you know the truth. There are things I did to protect you, to protect us. Please believe I meant no harm. My fingers trembled as I turned the page. But that was it. No explanation. No confession. Just a signature H. I looked back into the chest. Beneath the letter was a folded document. I pulled it out and froze. A birth certificate. But not Nathan's. Ethan Roberts. Born the same day. Same hospital. Same doctor. But the mother's name was someone else's. The attic tilted. For a moment, I thought I might pass out. There had to be a mistake. Maybe Harold had kept this for one of his genealogy projects. He loved tracing family trees. But why hide it in a locked chest? Why write me a letter about truth? I stared at the name again, Ethan Roberts, and the hospital seal that matched Nathan's birth record, exactly. It was like standing on a frozen lake and hearing the first crack echo beneath your feet. I whispered, Harold, what did you do? The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full thick with the weight of something waiting to be found. I closed the chest, but the sound of that click followed me downstairs, through the kitchen, through the hallway, until I stopped in front of Nathan's baby photo on the mantel. He was wrapped in a blue blanket, eyes closed, a tuft of brown hair sticking straight up like Harold's. I'd always loved that picture, the proof that we'd survived the storm that nearly killed us both. Now, I wasn't sure what I was looking at. That night, sleep wouldn't come. The house made too many old noises, and every one of them sounded like Harold, whispering. I poured a glass of whiskey I didn't really want, and sat at the kitchen table with the birth certificate in front of me. I'd been 17 when I met Harold. He was steady, older, dependable. He built our lives with his hands, one paycheck, one repair, one promise at a time. He'd been my anchor through everything. Even when we lost our second pregnancy. Even when we buried both our parents within a year. Could that man, my man, have lied about something as sacred as our child? No. But the paper on the table didn't care about loyalty or memory. It was colder than truth, more final than faith. The whiskey burned down my throat. I thought about calling Nathan. But what would I say? Hey, honey, your birth certificate just tried to ruin my evening, instead. I lit one of Harold's old cigarettes, my first in 20 years, and stared through the smoke until dawn bled through the kitchen window. At 6 a.m., I decided I needed proof. I needed someone official to tell me I was wrong. Because if I wasn't wrong, then everything I'd believed about my family, my love, my motherhood, would collapse like a house built on a lie. I placed the birth certificate back into the envelope and whispered to the empty room. All right, Harold. Let's see what you were hiding. The fridge hummed. The floorboards popped. The morning sun crept across the tiles and caught the edge of the envelope, making the hospital seal glint gold for just a second, like a warning. Or maybe an invitation. I didn't know then that the letter, the envelope, the attic itself, I had just opened a door I'd spend the rest of my life walking through. The county office smelled of paper and bleach. Fluorescent lights hummed, like insects trapped inside their own glow. I clutched the envelope against my chest and stepped up to the counter. A young clerk looked up, polite and bored. I need a certified copy of my son's birth certificate, I said. Nathan Brooks, born January 12th. Etienne-Jobai Wushileo. St. Mary's Hospital. He typed without looking at me. Then his fingers stopped. Could you repeat the name Nathan Brooks? He frowned. Typed again. There's no match for that. The words hung between us like static. There must be. Try again. Maybe it's misspelled. He searched longer this time, eyes narrowing at the screen. Finally, he said softly, Ma'am, are you sure about the date I was there? I snapped, then regretted the tone. He hesitated, glancing toward the older woman at the next desk. Some records from that winter are missing. Flood destroyed part of the archive. But, he lowered his voice, we have a record of an infant death that day. Unidentified male. Born and deceased within hours. I stared at him. Let me see it. He printed a page. My hand shook as I read, baby boy unidentified. Born January 12. Etienne-Jobai Wushileo. Died the same day. The hospital, St. Mary's. The sound in my ears was like wind in a tunnel. Could this be a mistake? I whispered. He only shrugged. Eyes kind, but helpless. Sometimes old records get mixed up. I walked out into the thin Seattle sunlight. The paper clenched in my fist. The world looked tilted. Cars too bright. Air too sharp. I drove home slower than usual. Afraid of red lights. Of thoughts that came too fast. When I finally parked, I sat there until the engine clicked itself quiet. Inside, I spread everything on the kitchen table, Harold's letter, the envelope, the 2 birth certificates, Nathan Brooks and Ethan Roberts, and now this report about an unnamed infant. The clock ticked. A drip, somewhere echoed, like a heartbeat. I had to prove it wrong. Nathan's baby album was on the bottom shelf, dusty from years of being too sacred to touch. I flipped through it. Each photo had Harold's handwriting on the back, dates, locations, milestones. None in my handwriting. None of me in the hospital. The earliest photo was dated February 23. 1956, 6 weeks after his supposed birth. He looked bigger, stronger, older than a newborn. My vision blurred. I closed the album and pressed it to my chest like it might fight back. The phone rang and startled me. I almost didn't answer. It was Clara, my niece. My only relative who still called. Aunt Eve, you sound tired. I'm fine. You're not. Are you eating? I found a letter. The words slipped out. What kind of letter? From Harold. About Nathan. About A lie. A pause. Then, the careful voice of someone stepping around a minefield. Do you want me to come by? No? I just need to know something. After I hung up, I went online, something Harold never learned to do. Government portals. Genealogy databases. Archived newspapers. My fingers shook on the keyboard. A headline popped up from 1956 Blizzard kills 2. Infant survives, car crash outside. Mary's. I clicked. The article said the mother, Rebecca Roberts, died instantly. The baby, Ethan Roberts, was taken to St. Mary's Hospital. I froze. It was him. The name from the certificate. I scrolled to the bottom, no mention of adoption. Only that the infant's fate remains uncertain. That night, rain hammered the roof. I sat in the living room, surrounded by proof that my life had cracks running through it. At midnight, I called Nathan. It went to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. What could I say, son? I might not be your mother after all. Sleep well. When I finally drifted into sleep, I dreamed of a hallway lined with doors. Every time I opened one, Harold was standing behind it, holding a baby wrapped in blue. But every time I reached out, the baby's face changed. Sometimes Nathan, sometimes a stranger, sometimes nothing but light. I woke up, gasping, heart pounding, mouth dry as ash. Morning light sliced across the kitchen table, illuminating the papers still there. The birth certificate gleamed where the sun hid its gold seal. I whispered, I'm coming for the truth. Harold. I drove back to St. Mary's, or what used to be St. Mary's. The hospital had closed in 1980. A burned-out husk, now fenced and tagged with graffiti. But across the street was a retirement home. Maybe someone who'd worked there still lived nearby. Inside the lobby, the receptionist, a kid barely older than my grandson, listened politely as I told my story. He disappeared and returned with a clipboard. Try room 214, he said. There's a Martha Henley. Says she used to be a nurse there. I walked down the hall, heart thudding with each fluorescent buzz overhead. When Martha opened the door, her hair was silver, her eyes sharp as needles. She studied me for a long moment before saying, You're Evelyn Brooks. I blinked. Do you remember me? She nodded slowly. That blizzard night, you wouldn't stop crying. Your husband, what was his name, Harold? Yes. He came back the next morning, alone. Her words crawled into me like cold air. Alone. He said the baby didn't make it. He signed the forms, held the body. He was broken. My voice was a whisper. The body. She nodded again. But an hour later, a police officer brought in another infant from the crash outside town. The mother dead on arrival. The child breathing. Barely. Harold saw him. I think he made a choice. The floor seemed to tilt again. A choice. I didn't say a word back then. Different times. Mrs. Brooks. Men decided things. We just followed orders. She looked at me then, eyes wet. I'm sorry. I thought he told you long ago. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. When I left the retirement home, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. The world had gone silent, as if the revelation had sucked every bit of sound away. Driving home, I caught myself gripping the wheel so hard, my knuckles turned white. I thought about Harold, his steady hands, his soft lies. How many nights had he watched me rock that baby and told himself the lie was love? The sun was setting when I pulled into the driveway. The house looked smaller. Or maybe I'd grown larger with the truth. Inside, I took every framed photo of Harold off the walls and set them face down on the floor. The air felt lighter, without his eyes following me. I poured another glass of whiskey and sat at the table with the nurse's words echoing. He made a choice. Outside, thunder rolled over the mountains, slow and distant, like someone dragging furniture in heaven. For the first time since Harold died, I whispered his name not in grief but in fury. You took my baby. Harold. You gave me another and called it Mercy. The storm answered with a flash of lightning that lit the whole room white. And I realized, with terrifying clarity, that tomorrow I would have to face Nathan and tell him who he really was. The drive back to the retirement home felt longer than it should have. The rain had left streaks on the windshield that looked like veins across glass. Every stoplight blinked red like a warning I kept ignoring. Room 214. That number replayed in my head until it didn't sound like a room anymore. Just a place where something waited. Martha Henley was sitting near the window when I walked in. The blinds threw lines of light across her face, cutting her age into measured bands. She looked up and smiled, a soft, practiced expression that nurses must learn to wear even after they've long retired. I wasn't sure you'd come back, she said. I wasn't sure either, I admitted. I sat down across from her. The room smelled of lavender lotion and old paper. On the nightstand was a glass of water, a Bible, and a framed photograph of a much younger Martha wearing a nurse's cap. Behind her, in the photo, I could just make out the sign St. Mary's Hospital. She noticed me staring. You remember that place too well, I said. Her eyes softened. I've thought about that night more times than I can count. Tell me everything, I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. She nodded, slow and deliberate, as if measuring how much the past could safely bear. It was the worst storm I'd ever seen. She began. Power lines down. Snow piling against the emergency entrance. We had 5 women in labor, and half the staff couldn't get in. You came in around midnight, young, terrified, barely conscious. The baby came fast. Too fast. My breath hitched. And she looked at her hands. He didn't make it. Mrs. Brooks. He was gone before dawn. The words landed like stones. Even though I'd prepared myself, hearing them spoken aloud broke something that had been clinging to denial. Martha continued. Harold came at sunrise. I remember his face. He looked hollowed out. I told him you needed rest. That you shouldn't wake yet. He said. She can't know. Not today. Then he signed the forms. What forms, I asked. Though I already knew. Death certificate. Release authorization. And something else, an adoption intake. There'd been a crash outside town. A young mother killed instantly. Newborn miraculously alive. The baby had no surviving relatives. Harold said he was going to fix what fate broke. His words. I pressed my fingers against my temples, trying to hold in the flood behind my eyes. So he just took him. He signed temporary guardianship. She said. Those were different days. Paperwork moved slow. Supervision slower. The doctor looked the other way. We all did. It felt merciful back then. Mercy. The word tasted like iron. I stood, pacing toward the window. Outside, the sky was a dull gray that matched every feeling inside me. Did anyone else know? Only the head nurse? She said. And she passed away years ago. I turned back. Why didn't you tell me sooner? She gave me a look that made me feel both young and ancient at once. Because Harold begged us not to. He said you were fragile. That you'd lost too much already. And maybe he was right. Maybe we all believed the lie because it hurt less. I wanted to hate her. I wanted to hate them all. But mostly, I wanted to crawl into the space between her words, where my son still lived untouched by truth. When I finally spoke, my voice cracked. That baby, the one from the crash, his name was Ethan Roberts. Martha nodded slowly. Yes. How did you? I found the certificate. She closed her eyes like a prayer. Then you already know everything I can tell you. I reached for the edge of her bed to steady myself. Do you remember the mother? She thought for a moment. Brown hair. Mid-20s. I think. The kind of face you don't forget, even when you try. Was she buried? They said she had no family. The county handled it. Silence pressed down between us, thick and airless. Finally, Martha reached out and touched my wrist. Mrs. Brooks. Harold wasn't a cruel man. He just loved you the only way he knew how, by erasing the parts of reality that could break you. I pulled my hand back gently. He didn't erase it. He just postponed the pain for decades. The hallway outside felt colder. My legs trembled as I walked. And twice I had to stop, pretending to read the exit sign just to catch my breath. At the lobby door, the receptionist smiled politely. "Everything okay?" "Ma'am," I nodded. "Yes. Everything's fine." It wasn't. In the car, I sat for a long time with my forehead against the steering wheel. The world had rearranged itself again, and I didn't know where to stand. When I finally started the engine, the radio clicked on static. Then an old country song Harold used to hum while fixing things. I turned it off. The quiet was worse. Home didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a museum exhibit labeled, "Life that once belonged to someone else." I walked through each room, touching things that suddenly seemed borrowed. The couch Harold picked out, the dishes we'd chosen together, Nathan's baby blanket, all pieces of a story built on someone else's tragedy. In the living room, I caught my reflection in the darkened TV screen. My face looked unfamiliar. I whispered to it, "Who are you?" No answer. Of course. Just the hum of appliances and the ticking clock Harold had repaired 100 times. I poured whiskey again. But it didn't taste right. Nothing did. I found myself at the piano, the one Nathan learned on when he was 7. My fingers hovered over the keys but refused to move. Harold used to sit beside him, patient, proud. "See, he's got your stubbornness," he'd say. But now I wondered whose blood truly ran through that boy's veins, mine, or a stranger's I'd never met. The question crawled under my skin like frost. At midnight I walked out to the porch. The rain had stopped, leaving the world wet and shining. The air smelled like cedar again, faint but unmistakable Harold's scent. I whispered into the dark, "I know now." The wind stirred, gentle at first, then stronger. The porch light flickered twice. Somewhere deep in the house, something creaked, a door, or a memory. Inside, I turned on every light. I needed brightness, something to drown out the shadows, whispering mercy like a curse. Then I took the birth certificates, both of them, and pinned them side by side on the corkboard above the desk. 2 names, 1 life, and me, standing in the middle. Mother to both and neither. The longer I stared, the more the papers seemed to pulse, as if even they knew they didn't belong together. I whispered to Harold's ghost, "You made a choice. But now, I have to live with it." My voice broke on the last word. Later, in bed, I dreamed again, but this time, the hallway of doors was gone. Instead, I stood in a hospital room, bathed in white light. A nurse handed me a baby wrapped in blue. I took him. But when I looked down, his face flickered, my son. Then another child. Then nothing but light again. I screamed and woke with tears on my cheeks. I sat up, whispering to the empty room, "Tomorrow, I'll find Nathan. He deserves to know." Outside, dawn was breaking thin and gray, the color of truth. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Harold's hands, the same hands that once built our kitchen table, fixing the hinge on the pantry door, tucking our baby into bed. Now I saw them signing papers under fluorescent hospital lights, rewriting the world without my consent. By morning, the house looked haunted. Light from the kitchen window hit the 2 birth certificates still pinned to the corkboard, turning them into mirrors that refused to reflect the same truth. I dialed Nathan's number before I could lose my nerve. It rang once, twice. Then his voice, calm, professional, answered. "Hey." Mom. Everything okay? I hadn't heard his voice in 2 months. It felt heavier now. Older somehow. I need you to come home, I said. Today. A pause. Is something wrong? I can't tell you on the phone. He sighed. Mom. I have class until 4, Nathan. My tone surprised both of us. Please. There was silence on the line. Then, a quiet. Okay. I'll be there tonight. I hung up before I could cry. The hours dragged. I tried to keep busy cleaning the counters that didn't need it, rearranging the photo frames that had already been taken down. I even baked cornbread, though I hadn't touched the oven since Harold's wake. At 6. Headlights swept across the driveway. I froze, wiping my hands on a towel that was already clean. Nathan stepped inside without knocking. He still looked like Harold in the jawline, the posture, the habit of scanning the room before speaking. Mom, he said softly. You sound off. What's going on? I gestured to the table. Sit down. He did. Cautiously. The 2 birth certificates lay between us. He leaned forward, reading the names, then frowned. What is this? It's the truth, I said. My voice came out thin, brittle. Harold kept them in a locked chest. I found them after he died. One is yours. The other belongs to a baby born the same day, the same hospital. But not to me. He blinked. What are you saying? I inhaled, steadying myself. I think you're not my biological son. The words felt like poison in my mouth. He stared at me for several seconds that lasted years. Then he laughed sharp, disbelieving. That's insane. I wish it were. He pushed back his chair, running both hands through his hair. This is ridiculous. You've been under stress. You shouldn't. I talked to someone, I said quickly. A nurse. From St. Mary's. She remembers that night. My baby didn't make it. Nathan. Harold. He brought another newborn from a crash. A woman named Rebecca Roberts died. Her baby lived. Harold thought he was saving me. He went very still. You're saying I'm that baby? Yes. He backed away from the table, shaking his head. No. No. That doesn't make sense. Dad would never. He did. I said. My throat was tight, voice breaking. He did. Nathan. I have the records. The statements. Everything. He turned away, pressing his palms against his face. When he spoke, his voice cracked open. Then what am I? Mom, a mistake, a replacement for the one you lost. I stood up, reaching for him. No. You are my son. He stepped back. Your son died. I'm just the lie that came after. His words hit like fists. You think I didn't love you, I said. Do you think that love was fake because Harold made a choice I didn't know about? Every scraped knee, every bedtime story, every fever I sat up through, that was real. Nathan, you were real. He turned toward the window, jaw trembling. You should have told me sooner. I didn't know until last week. He laughed again. Hollow this time. Of course. Of course Harold had to screw this up, even from the grave. He looked at me, eyes wet, angry, scared. Do you know what it's like to find out you're someone else, that your whole life was borrowed? I took a step closer. Do you know what it's like to lose your child twice? Silence. The rain started outside, soft at first, then heavier, filling the house with a sound like static. He sat down again, staring at the papers. Rebecca Roberts, he whispered, touching the name. Was she my real mother? She died in the crash. He nodded, eyes far away. Then maybe it's better this way. I frowned. What do you mean? He gave a sad smile. Maybe she wanted me to have a life. You gave me that, even if it started wrong. I exhaled, my whole body trembling with the weight of that sentence. We sat like that for a while, Two people bound by love and lies, staring at the proof of both. Finally, he stood. I need some air. He walked out before I could stop him, leaving the door open and the rain pouring in. I ran after him, barefoot, the cold water soaking my robe. He was halfway down the driveway, standing under the streetlight, rain dripping from his hair. Nathan, he turned. I just need to think. Mom, please, come inside. I pleaded. You'll catch cold. He smiled faintly. You sound like you always did. And then he got in the car and drove off into the storm. I stood there, rain hitting my face, my arms, the empty space he'd left behind. When I went back inside, I closed the door and pressed my forehead against it. The quiet afterward was worse than the thunder. I picked up the certificates again and placed them carefully into the chest where I'd found them. Then I locked it, not to hide the truth this time, but to keep it from consuming me. In the mirror above the mantel, I caught my reflection. My eyes were red, my lips pale. I looked like someone who'd aged 10 years overnight. I whispered to Harold's ghost. You thought you were saving me. You saved no one. Then, softer. And yet, thank you. Because I still couldn't hate him. That night, I dreamed of Nathan as a boy again. 5 years old. Running down the hallway in pajamas. Calling Mommy, with his little arms wide open. I picked him up. And for one perfect heartbeat. The lie didn't matter. When I woke, the pillow was damp. And the dawn light came in weak and thin, like forgiveness, trying to find its way through cracks. I looked at the empty house and said out loud, he'll come back. I didn't know if I meant Nathan or Harold. Maybe both. But for the first time, the hope didn't feel like denial. It felt like survival. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world scrubbed raw and empty. The driveway glittered with puddles that caught the sunlight like glass shards. I watched the street from the kitchen window, half expecting Nathan's car to appear. It didn't. The silence in the house had a pulse. I could feel it in the floorboards. I made coffee but didn't drink it. My hands shook too much. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the chest again, the one Harold had hidden from me. The one that had cracked our life open like an egg. I unlocked it with the same small screwdriver. The motion now, too familiar. Inside, everything looked the same. The envelope, the letters, the birth certificates, but under the bottom layer of papers, I noticed something I hadn't before. A false bottom. I pried it loose. Dust rose like breath from a ghost. Beneath was a small leather-bound book. The cover worn smooth where fingers had held it often. The smell hit me first: tobacco, cedar, and the faint sweetness of old paper. I knew instantly what it was. Harold's handwriting filled the first page. January 13, 1956. He stopped breathing in my arms. I read the first line 3 times before I could move to the next. Evelyn was unconscious. I couldn't let this destroy her. God forgive me. The ink had bled in places, warped by tears or rain or time. The nurse said there was another baby. Alone. No family. Maybe this is mercy. Maybe this is madness. I read every word. Every confession. He wrote about the night in detail, the panic, the chaos, the silence when our baby stopped crying. He wrote about how he'd held that small, lifeless body, and how something inside him had broken so cleanly he'd never feel whole again. He couldn't bear to see me wake and crumble. So when the nurse told him about the newborn from the crash, he made his choice. Signed papers he didn't read. Swapped one name for another. He brought me a baby and told me he was ours. And I had believed him. For 35 years. I believed him. I pressed my hand against the diary's page, my skin trembling against the ink. July 1964. She smiles when he calls her mama. She never asks why the doctor never came by again. I think she's finally happy. Maybe lies are just another kind of medicine. I stopped reading and closed my eyes. I could almost hear his voice low. Calm. The one that always said, "Don't worry. Eve. I'll take care of it." I turned the page. December 1970. Nathan has Harold's eyes. Everyone says so. Maybe that's why it feels real now. Sometimes I dream of the other boy, Ethan, and I see him standing in snow. He never blames me. There were more entries, each one, a piece of a man unspooling himself in ink. He wrote about birthdays. I'm school plays. His guilt that never faded. He wrote about the nurse, Martha, and how he'd paid her to stay silent, to retire early. He wrote about me always, about me, how he loved me, how he hated himself for loving me enough to lie. And at the end, one final entry dated 5 years ago. In shaky handwriting that looked like his hands must have been trembling, I wanted to tell her, every time I saw her eyes soften when she looked at him. I wanted to say it, but then she'd smile. And I'd remember why I lied in the first place. Because her smile was the only light left in the world. I can't take that from her. Let her keep it. Let her believe. The last line trailed off mid-sentence. Like he'd run out of strength. I sat there for a long time, holding the book, feeling the pulse of all those years echo through it. For the first time since he died, I didn't feel anger. I felt the ache of a man who'd carried a coffin inside him for decades and somehow still kissed me goodnight. I whispered, "You stupid, wonderful man." The house seemed to sigh back, a sound between forgiveness and grief. I spent the rest of the afternoon reading his diary cover to cover, stopping only when the sunlight moved across the floor and turned golden. Each word rearranged something in me. The rage softened. The shock melted into sorrow. When I closed the diary, I realized I wasn't shaking anymore. My breathing was slow. My heart still hurt, but it hurt cleanly now, like a wound after the poison's been drawn out. I took the diary to the living room and placed it beside Harold's ashes on the mantel. "There," I said. "You don't have to hide anymore." For a moment, I imagined him standing there beside me, tall, quiet, the smell of cedar clinging to him. I almost said, "I forgive you." But the words stuck. Forgiveness felt too small, too fragile for what he'd done and why. Instead, I whispered, "I understand." That evening, the doorbell rang. I froze, heart jumping. When I opened it, Nathan was standing there, soaked from rain again, hair plastered to his forehead. His eyes were red, but his voice was steady. "Can I come in?" I nodded. He stepped inside, dripping onto the rug, looking around like the house was suddenly unfamiliar. "I drove all night," he said quietly. "I kept seeing your face." "I found his diary," I said. He looked at me sharply. "What did it say?" "Everything," I said. "He didn't mean to hurt us. He just couldn't face losing another thing he loved." Nathan swallowed hard. "So, he stole a child." I nodded. He sat down, hands clasped between his knees, staring at the floor. "I don't know who I am anymore. You're still my son." He looked up at me. "You sure I raised you?" "Didn't I?" He laughed softly, bitterly. "Yeah. But does that count?" "Yes," I said firmly. "It counts for everything." We sat in silence again. The kind of silence that doesn't demand to be broken. Finally, he said, "I don't hate him." I smiled faintly. "Neither do I." He looked around the room, eyes landing on Harold's urn and the diary beside it. "What will you do with it?" "Keep it," I said. "Some truths don't need to be erased, just learned from." He nodded. "Maybe one day I'll read it." "Maybe," I said. He stood, walked to the window, and watched the rain begin again, soft, hesitant, forgiving. When he turned back, his voice cracked. Mom, thank you. For what? For loving me. Even after. I crossed the room, touched his face, and said, "That's the only thing I ever did right." He hugged me then tight, desperate, like he was trying to remember what it felt like to belong. And in that moment, I realized that maybe Harold had been right. After all, some lies are born out of love, and some truths are just another way of saying goodbye. The next morning, I woke to the sound of birds. Not rain, not wind birds, the kind of sound that makes you forget, for a second, that your whole life just fell apart. Nathan was gone. His car wasn't in the driveway, but there was a note on the table, folded neatly beside an empty mug. "Mom, I'm going to find her grave." The handwriting was tight, deliberate. My heart stumbled. Rebecca Roberts, the name that had haunted every page of Harold's diary. I read the note again, then looked out the window. The sky was pale blue, the kind that looks harmless but hides a cold wind. I couldn't let him go alone. I grabbed my keys, my coat, and the diary, not because I needed proof, but because I needed Harold's voice with me. The drive to the old county cemetery took an hour. The GPS struggled to find the route. Half the roads didn't even exist on the map anymore. When I finally saw the rusted gate, the sign barely hanging by one chain, I knew I was in the right place. Nathan's car was parked under a dying oak tree. He was standing a few yards away, hands shoved into his pockets, staring at the ground. The graveyard was small rows of crooked stones, most of the names worn down by time. I walked to him slowly, the gravel crunching under my shoes. He didn't turn around. "She's here," he said quietly. The grave was simple. A small stone that read, "Rebecca Roberts, 1931, 1956, beloved daughter, mother, and dreamer." Someone, probably the county workers, had left plastic flowers there long ago. They were sun-bleached, brittle. Nathan knelt, brushing dirt from the name. His shoulders shook, but he didn't make a sound. I stood beside him, unsure if I should speak. The wind carried the smell of pine and damp earth. "She was 25, I whispered. "My age when I had you." He looked up at me, eyes red. "She never got to see me." I nodded. "And I never got to see mine." He stared at the ground again, voice breaking. "Do you think she'd hate me for living her son's life?" I crouched beside him, placing my hand on his shoulder. "No, Nathan. I think she'd thank you for living it well." He didn't move, but I saw his jaw tighten, the kind of strength you learn from grief. I pulled the diary from my bag and opened it to the last page. Harold wrote something about her. He looked at me sharply. He knew her. I shook my head. Only for a moment. But he carried her in his guilt forever. I handed him the diary. He read in silence for a long time, his lips moving slightly over Harold's words. When he finished, he closed it and pressed it to his chest. "He wasn't a monster," Nathan said finally. "No," I said. "Just a man who made a terrible choice for the right reason." We stood there for a while, both staring at the same name, both realizing how small we were in the face of everything that had already been lost. Then Nathan said, "I want to fix her grave." "What do you mean, real flowers?" "A new headstone. Something that doesn't look forgotten." I smiled. "She'd like that." He nodded. "It's the least I can do." The wind picked up, scattering leaves around our feet. One landed on the stone, a perfect, unbroken maple leaf. Nathan picked it up and tucked it into the diary like a bookmark. When we left the cemetery, he didn't say anything for a while. I drove this time, his head resting against the window, eyes closed but not asleep. "Halfway home," he said. "Mom, what if there are others?" "Other lies," Harold told. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Then we'll face them too." He nodded. And for a moment, he looked like a little boy again, The same boy who used to fall asleep in the car after soccer games. Grass still stuck to his socks. Back home, the sun had already started to set. The house didn't feel haunted anymore, just quiet in a way that felt earned. Nathan helped me bring the diary inside. He placed it gently on the mantel beside Harold's urn and the folded flag from his funeral. He looked at me. You really forgave him, didn't you? I'm learning to, I said. Forgiveness isn't clean. It's a process, like grief. He nodded slowly, running his hand over the urn. You know, I used to think he was the strongest man alive. He was, I said softly. Just not in the way we thought. Nathan turned toward me. What about you? What about me? He smiled faintly. You're the strongest person I know. I wanted to laugh, but the sound stuck in my throat. I'm just tired. Nathan. He stepped closer and hugged me. Then rest. I'll take it from here. I didn't realize I was crying until I felt his shirt damp under my cheek. That night, I sat by the fireplace with a cup of tea, watching the flames dance. The diary was still open on the coffee table. I thought about Rebecca, the woman I'd never met, but somehow shared a son with. I wondered if she'd had my same stubbornness, my same laugh. I whispered to the fire. If you're listening, thank you. The flames flickered, brighter for a moment, as if answering. For the first time in weeks, I felt something like peace. But peace is fragile. And as the clock ticked past midnight, I heard it, a knock at the door. Not loud, but deliberate. I frowned, setting my cup down. The knock came again, 3 slow, heavy raps. When I opened the door, a woman stood there, tall, thin, with sharp eyes and a trench coat slick with rain. Mrs. Brooks, she asked. Her voice was low. Practiced the voice of someone who asked questions for a living. Yes, I said cautiously. She pulled a badge from her pocket. Detective Laura Hensley. I'm with the Seattle Police Department. My heart stuttered. Is Nathan okay? She shook her head. He's fine. Ma'am, this is about your husband. Harold Brooks. I froze. He's been dead for 5 years. I know, she said, but something's come up. We found a case file from 1956, an infant kidnapping at St. Mary's Hospital. It was recently unsealed. I felt the blood drain from my face. The detective continued, her tone gentle but firm. We believe your husband might have been involved. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. I think, she said carefully, it's time we talk about what really happened that night. The detective stepped into my living room, shaking rain from her coat. She didn't sit until I offered. Her eyes scanned the space, the urn, the diary, the folded flag, all of it laid bare like evidence. Mrs. Brooks, she began gently. I understand this is a lot, but we found new information connected to your husband. We just need you to confirm a few things. I nodded numbly. I'll tell you whatever I can. She pulled out a worn folder, the kind that looked older than both of us. Inside were photos, reports, yellowed documents. She laid one on the table, a black and white photograph of St. Mary's Hospital, taken the night of the blizzard. This is from January 12th. Itenjo by Wushileo, she said. A nurse on duty reported 2 missing medical files after a power outage that night, one belonging to an infant born to Evelyn Brooks, and one to a woman named Rebecca Roberts. I stared at the picture. The snow frozen mid-fall like ash in the air. We reopened the case when the records were digitized last month, she continued. One of the lost files was found inside a mislabeled box at the county archive. It contained a signed affidavit from the attending doctor. She paused, looking directly at me. Do you know a doctor? Samuel Kane. The name hit me like a faint echo. He was our doctor. Harold trusted him. She nodded. Dr. Kane wrote a statement never submitted. He said, "Your husband asked him to falsify the death certificate of your child in exchange for a cash donation to the hospital. The doctor refused. But later that night, during the storm, the power went out. When it came back on, both the certificates and one of the newborns were gone." I felt my stomach twist. "Gone." The detective's voice softened. "Dr. Hans." Kane filed a report. But the police at the time thought the baby had been lost in the confusion. There was a fire in the storage wing that destroyed much of the paperwork. The case went cold. She slid another photo across the table, a picture of a young man in a uniform. "We believe Harold's connection to the hospital board helped him cover his tracks. But that's not the most shocking part." My voice barely came out. "Then what is?" She leaned forward. "Rebecca Roberts didn't die instantly. She was taken to another hospital across town and survived for 6 hours. She asked about her baby repeatedly until she was sedated. According to the nurse's log, she never knew he'd been transferred." The world tilted again. I gripped the edge of the table to stay upright. "She lived," I whispered. The detective nodded. "Long enough to beg them to find him. Her last words were, 'Tell my son I'll find him in the next life.'" For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. Every sound in the house vanished. No ticking clock. No rain. No fire crackle. Just the roar of silence. I finally said, "Why tell me this now?" "Because," she said quietly, "a box of unclaimed evidence was found last week. Inside was a locket with a photo of Rebecca holding her baby. It was tagged as Exhibit B, never returned to family. You're listed as the legal guardian on the adoption paperwork. Technically, it belongs to you." She handed it over, a tiny silver locket, tarnished and cold. When I opened it, I saw her face for the first time. Young, soft eyes, the same shape as Nathan's. Tears blurred everything. "She looks like him," I whispered. "Yes, ma'am," the detective said softly. "She does." I held the locket in my palm, the chain warm from my skin. "What happens now?" She stood, buttoning her coat. "Nothing. Unless you want to file for posthumous disclosure. The case is technically closed. Statute of limitations expired decades ago. But if you want the record cleared, we can help." I shook my head. "No. Let it rest." She nodded, almost relieved. "I understand." Before leaving, she paused at the door. "For what it's worth, your husband wasn't the only one who lied that night. The hospital's director helped him. They covered it up together. Maybe they both thought they were doing the right thing." After she left, the house felt heavier. But not in a bad way, more like the truth had finally settled, taking its seat among the ghosts that already lived here. I sat at the table for hours, the locket in my palm, Harold's diary open beside it. I read his words again, "Let her believe." He'd written that to protect me from a truth I wasn't ready for. But maybe he hadn't realized that love, real love, doesn't need lies to survive. It just needs the courage to face them. When Nathan came home that night, his hair still damp from the drizzle, I was still sitting there. "Detective came by?" he asked. "Yes." He studied my face. "You look calm." "I am," I said. "She told me Rebecca lived a few hours after the crash." His eyes widened. What I handed him the locket. He opened it, staring at the picture like it was a mirror to a life that could have been. "She looks kind," he said softly. "She was," I replied. "I can feel it." He sat beside me, silent for a long time. Then he said, "You know what's crazy? Even after everything, I still feel like your son." I smiled, tears running freely now. "That's because you are." He laughed through his own tears. "So, what now?" "Now," I said, "we remember them. All of them." He looked at Harold's urn, then at the diary. "And him?" I nodded. "Especially him. He stood, kissed my forehead, and went to bed. I stayed behind, watching the fire fade to embers. When the last flame went out, I whispered into the dark Harold, "She forgives you, and so do I." Outside, the wind shifted. The chimes on the porch rang once low and soft. Like a sigh. For the first time, I didn't feel haunted. I felt watched over. Days later, Nathan and I returned to the cemetery. The new stone had already been set clean marble, with her full name carved deep. Rebecca Roberts Brooks, 1931, 1956, mother of Ethan, loved by Evelyn. I traced the letters with my fingertips, my breath fogging in the cool air. Nathan laid fresh lilies at the base of the stone. "It's beautiful," he said. "It's right," I replied. We stood there in silence. Two people bound by blood, love, and a lie that somehow became a family. As we turned to leave, I glanced back one last time. The sunlight caught the marble just right, and for a moment, I swore I saw two figures standing there, Harold and Rebecca, watching, smiling. I didn't blink. I didn't want to lose them again. When I finally did look away, the world felt lighter, like a story finished. A wound finally healed. And for the first time in my life, I didn't need to ask who I was. I knew.